Greek historian Herodotus, 484–413 BC, is well known for his book Histories. Cicero, the Roman writer, referred to him as the father of history. However, detractors, both ancient and contemporary, have rejected him, labeling him the father of lies, since they believe his writings are little more than fairy tales. Herodotus did occasionally misreport events or embellish them for dramatic effect, but overall, his reports have been determined to be rather trustworthy. Subsequent archaeological evidence has disproved some of the early criticism of his work, demonstrating that the majority of his often challenged statements were either correct or based on widely acknowledged facts at the time, or that they were the product of his mistranslation or misreading. Even though it's evident that he makes a lot of statements that are now acknowledged to be false, he still gets a lot of things correct in his writing. Even when the information he gives is inaccurate or overstated, his histories frequently offer a path toward comprehending a particular event or cultural paradigm. For most historians today, Herodotus remains the father of history and a trustworthy source of information about antiquity. Athenians who disagreed with Herodotus's description of the Battle of Marathon, 490 BC, and in particular whose families should have received the greatest credit for defeating the Persians, are said to be the ones who first criticized his writings. The veracity of his travelogues' narratives has drawn more pointed criticism of his work. One example of this is his claim of fox-sized ants in Persia who spread gold dust when digging their mounds. This account was regularly rejected until in 1984, the French author and explorer Michel Peissel confirmed that a fox-sized marmot in the Himalayas did indeed spread gold dust when digging, and that accounts showed the animal had done so in antiquity, as the villagers had a long history of gathering this dust. Even though not much is known about him, it is safe to assume that he was raised in an affluent, aristocratic household in Asia Minor that could afford to send him to school. It is believed that his writing prowess is proof of a rigorous education at the top universities of his day. He was literate and wrote in Ionian Greek. His apparent free choice to go further supports his status as a wealthy man. Given that his accounts of combat are extremely accurate and consistently presented from the perspective of a foot soldier, it is believed that he was a hoplite in the army. Herodotus was not a native of Athens. He was born in Halicarnassus, the modern Turkish city of Bodrum, about the time of the Persian Wars. Halicarnassus was a Dorian town with substantial intermarriage among its Greek, Carian, and Persian populations. If the later ancient reports that have come down to us are correct, his family was exiled during the troubled years after the Persian Wars, and as a very young man, Herodotus may have lived on the island of Samos. His occasional comments in the histories show us that he traveled widely around the world of the East Mediterranean. We do not know when and how the histories were first written down. Very likely, however, they arose out of recitations or readings that he gave over several years in other Greek cities and Athens at the height of its imperial power. Herodotus undoubtedly made mistakes in his work, but overall, his history can be trusted, and academic research on his writings across all fields has continued to validate all of his most significant findings. Herodotus identifies himself in the prologue to his work as a native of Halicarnassus, and this is accepted as his birthplace, even though Aristotle and the Suda claim he was a native of 𝙎ᴜ, a Greek colony in the region of modern-day Italy. This discrepancy is generally understood as a mistake made in an ancient source, possibly a translation of Herodotus's work, as Herodotus may have lived at 𝙎ᴜ but had not been born there. He made extensive excursions to Egypt, Africa, and Asia Minor, recording his experiences and views in writing. This allowed future generations to benefit from his thorough reports of significant historical occurrences as well as daily life in Greece, Egypt, Asia Minor, and on numerous wonders he saw while traveling. Babylon was not as big as Herodotus says, and it had 8 gates, not even close to 100, according to archaeological evidence and other ancient accounts. Thus, despite Herodotus's apparent notion that he visited the location personally, it has been concluded that this story was based on hearsay rather than a first-hand visit. Given his admiration for Homer's works, he modeled the structure of his histories after them, It is believed that his account of Babylon mimics the older author's depiction of Egyptian Thebes. Similarly, Herodotus, like many of the writers of that time, sought a good story rather than exact details. Such narrative-oriented character of his made the histories criticized and disparaged by his opponents in antiquity, but conversely, this feature makes it of much esteem today. The author was a master in the creation of realistic settings, interesting characters, and beginning explanations without very firm facts to have the reader immersed in the events of the stories that Herodotus narrates. He was not a standoffish observer of the society he portrayed, but rather offered his view to all lengths of what he felt of a person, custom, or event. But though his esteem for Homer never wavered, Aristotle himself would question the historical authenticity of the Iliad, asking himself why the Achaeans dragged a war that lasted so many years, the Trojan War, to fight over a single woman. This is just one of hundreds of separate incidents that prove Herodotus's temperament and its influence on his writings. Herodotus's personality comes through quite often in the pages of his works. A reader understands that one is hearing from an individual with certain tastes and interests, and that the author considers that what he has to say is important enough to require no explanation, qualification, or apology for perceived inaccuracy. If Herodotus felt like including something, he would include it, and he never seems to care if readers found fault with that. Herodotus, the unique forerunner of other ancient writers, is the only one who defines his account as his work and no one else. No mention of divine sources, as the case with other writers before him. Not only that his personal opinion and biasing is paramount, but he is also the author of the first publication of the histories of the Olympic Games. Works at this time were published by being read aloud, and the Greek writer Lucian of Samosata claims that Herodotus read the entirety of his work to the audience in one sitting and received great applause. Another version of the publication of the work, however, claims that Herodotus refused to read his book to the crowd until there was ample cloud cover to shade him on the platform. While he waited, the audience left, and this event is what gave rise to the maxim, "like Herodotus and his shade," alluding to one who misses an opportunity by waiting for optimal circumstances. At the end of his wanderings, he did come back to live in the Greek colony of 𝙬ᴜ, and there he edited and revised the histories, which was completed soon after. He had stayed in Athens for a while, and it was recorded that he returned there as well. Considering the historian's viewpoint, he presumably died in Athens of the same plague that killed the Athenian statesman Pericles around 425 BC or 413 BC. Such was the extent of his popularity at that time that almost every city claimed to be the burial place of his body, and a memorial was built in his honor. His work is still of interest to many people today, and he is still known as the primary source of writing about the ancient world that they have studied. Even his passages that have been challenged or rejected still offer a reader significant insight into the event or culture he describes, even if only to illustrate how a Greek writer viewed the culture and practices of non-Greeks.